And I don't know how long I leave it up for. Great. Greetings, everyone. My name is Anna Bachman, and I am the Healthy Watershed Program Manager here at Puget Sound Keeper Alliance. We are an environmental organization that's been around since the early 1980s, and we work on clean water in Puget Sound. And I am the chair of this panel presentation today on community monitoring and stewardship in urban watersheds. Now, I know it usually takes a bit of time for folks to get into a session and seated, so I've decided to put a poll at the very first slide. I'm hoping that my session host, Adam, can put the poll up for me. Is that possible, Adam? Excellent. So I'm going to give you just a minute to read that poll and enter your responses just to get an idea of who's in the session today. And hopefully, Adam, can you put up results for me as well? Just briefly in about a minute. I know that people are always joining a session. It takes a bit of time, but let's give it an extra minute. If you are concerned about what session you're in, this is on community monitoring and stewardship, just like the slide says. And we're just doing a brief poll to get an idea of who's in our audience today. And do you want to put up poll results there for a moment, Adam? All right, so we have just under are people who have not been involved in leading or being a member of kind of a stewardship monitoring group. So you're here to learn. That's great. Awesome. Okay, so let's continue on. You can take that poll off. The premise for today's panel and the issue that all the presenters will, to one extent or another, be discussing is this statement that if we want to improve and protect the water quality and the health of Puget Sound, we must address our urban waterways. Following on that statement is this central idea of community involvement. If we want to move the needle and make real change for our troubled urban waterways, we need to engage with the communities through which these waters are flowing. Now, throughout Puget Sound and the Salish Sea as a whole, there are many polluted waterways. We know this. This slide shows just those streams, rivers, and lakes that are included in what is called the 303D list in the United States, just in the US alone. For those who are not familiar with this, the term 303D list is short basically for a state's list of impaired and threatened waters. This includes stream and river segments and lakes. States in the United States are required to submit a list of their impaired waters to the US EPA every 2 years. For each water body on the list, the state must identify the pollutant or pollutants, plural, causing the impairment. And in addition, the state assigns priority for development of a total maximum daily loads, or TMDL, based on the severity of the pollution and the sensitivity of the uses to be made of these waters. Now, the total maximum daily load, TMDL, is a regulatory term from the US Clean Water Act. The list is really used to set pollution reduction goals, and the TMDL is essentially a plan for achieving these reductions, and it identifies the maximum amount of a pollutant that a body of water can receive while still meeting water quality standards. The unfortunate thing is that many of the waterways that have been on the 303D list have been so for many years, decades even. Now, this is a map which shows in red those streams that are on the 303D list of impaired waters just in Washington state. And it's shown with another layer on population density. The darker the gray that you see on the map, the higher the urban density. Here in Washington, at least, we see a large number of impaired streams associated with densely populated urban areas. But there are also many community-based groups and community focus groups, large and small, all over the region that are working on monitoring and stewarding these urban waterways. This panel discussion today, we will hear from about 5 groups that are working in 4 counties in Washington state. So first, we have Eric Adman, who is the president of the board of the Snow King Watershed Council. They started a community-based water monitoring program about 6 years ago, which they've operated with several nonprofit and government partners. They're active in King and Snohomish County. Next, we'll hear from 2 individuals, Michelle Carranza Velasco and Rai Yan, both with the Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association. Michelle is a high school senior that's been working with DVSA for about 2 years on different projects, and before that was an intern with the Duwamish River Community Coalition. Michelle also wants to pursue environmental engineering in her future. Rai is the project manager at DVSA, and they have been working with youth to develop projects that monitor water quality in the Duwamish River and educate community members about related issues. Their background is in landscape architecture, sustainability, sustainable community development, and biochemistry. Then next we'll hear from Kirsten McDad, who is a pollution prevention specialist at Resources, an environmental nonprofit based in Bellingham. And it is part of the North Sound Baykeeper team, which is a sister organization to Puget Sound Keeper Alliance. They work to tackle stormwater issues through public education, engagement, monitoring, and watchdogging relevant permits. Fourth on our list, we have Hannah and Charlene, Hannah Park and Charlene Piaquinto. Unfortunately, they had a conflict with today. They're both juniors at Auburn High School and are members of the youth mentoring group Unleash the Brilliance, and they work with Soundkeeper in a project called the Lost Urban Creeks Project. Unfortunately, Hannah and Charlene aren't with us today, but they've recorded their presentation to show to you today. Last, but certainly not least, is Gary Olson, who is the Thornton Creek Alliance treasurer and lead for their community-based monitoring program. He's also chair of TCA's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Committee. Gary's degree is in chemistry. His career involved work in manufacturing, research, and development. He's also worked with the Environmental Protection Agency in Region 10, dealing with air quality on Indian reservations in the region. So with that introduction, I would like to turn it over to Eric first.
Thank you. So I hope everybody can hear me fine. My name is Eric Adman, and I'm the president of the Snow King Watershed Council. We're a all-volunteer nonprofit organization that's been around for about 10 years now. And I got involved in this work as a volunteer myself because I live on a little creek in Kenmore called Little Swamp Creek. And by living on that creek, I started to become curious about the creek, issues that affect the creek, what is the health of the creek. And that led me ultimately to helping to found this nonprofit organization, which is essentially our focus is advocacy for streams and other water bodies. Next slide, please. So we have a water monitoring program. One of our programs is our Snow King Water Watchers program. And this again is a 100% volunteer program. It's we call it a community-based water monitoring program, which means that we train volunteer members of the community to monitor local creeks with the idea that they become stewards of their local water body. And they can use that information for a variety of things. They can use it to raise awareness of the stream They can use it to as a way to communicate with their local elected officials or with their neighbors or others, or also to report issues that they find on the creek. So there's a number of different things that the volunteers do with their data. Next slide, please. So what our volunteers monitor are a number of different things. Typically, we monitor monthly for what we call water chemistry and bacteria. So water chemistry are some fairly standard variables like dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, alkalinity, hardness, and turbidity. And then we also monitor for bacteria, and we're kind of looking at primarily E. coli. So we use a technique called Coliscan Easy Gel that our volunteers can use to collect bacteria data and record that in our database. And then about once a year, we try to evaluate our sites for what we call benthic macroinvertebrates, which are essentially small stream-dwelling insects and other invertebrates that live in the bottom of the stream. And they're more or less sensitive to water pollution. So that gives us kind of a benchmark of the health of a given reach of the stream. And then recently we've added a couple other variables in terms of stream flow and habitat assessment. So that's what we train our volunteers to monitor. Next. So there's a number of things that community-based water monitoring can do for you or for a community. One is it can foster a connection of people to their local environment. I think a lot of people live in different communities and don't really have a sense at all of the fact that there's streams there that have been there probably for 10,000 years, and they don't really know about the existence of the stream or that what they do can have an influence on that stream. So we're educating people about that. Another benefit of community-based water monitoring is that you really can bring in a variety of people. So, it's something which is interesting for everybody from elementary age youth on up through retired persons. So really it's a full spectrum of people that can get involved. And you also can kind of create really a sense of community amongst the people who are doing this work. Next slide, please. So one of the questions we were asked to answer in preparing this presentation is, what are the secret ingredients needed to create community-based efforts to protect urban watersheds? And I would say that there's several. The first that really seems to be key is a sense of place and kind of ownership of that place. So I feel like some of the more successful programs are focused around a particular creek or watershed. So a good example would be Gary Olson is going to talk later about Thornton Creek and the Thornton Creek Alliance. So they're focused on the Thornton Creek and its watershed. There's other organizations like that. And I feel like having people feel connected to that water body is something which is a key ingredient. Another key ingredient is just being aware of the environment and issues in the environment. And probably the primary environmental issue that affects our local water bodies is stormwater. And a lot of people aren't even aware of what is stormwater. So part of our program is trying to educate people about what is stormwater, what effect does that have on the stream. Another key ingredient is empowering people to feel like they're actually able to help contribute to the solution of the problem. Sometimes these problems they have there's large forces at work, like land development, and it's hard to do anything about that. But by raising awareness of the stream with your local elected officials, that's a way that you can help contribute to the solution. A couple other key ingredients are funding and resources. So it costs a certain amount. Our program is pretty low cost because it's all volunteer, but there is still a certain amount of ongoing expense. And then finally, people just have to have the free time available, which is why a lot of our program volunteers are retired persons. Next slide, please. So some of the things that we've had as successes of our program is some of our monitors have been able to identify problems when they see them, like construction stormwater issues is one of the a case in point that comes to mind. Another example of a program success is we've found some of the creeks that we're monitoring have issues with contamination from bacteria. And so we've been able to draw attention from local jurisdictions to that creek and that contamination issue and partner with them in trying to find what is the source of that so we can address it. We've also been successful in collaborating with local jurisdictions. And I think that's another key thing to try to do in this work is to try to find out what's already happening with the local city or county around you. What are they doing and how can your volunteer efforts best complement that? Another program success of ours is that we've been able to work with a lot of different organizations and provide training to them, which then gets leveraged. So for example, we work with an organization called Nature Vision that does training to school groups. And we've worked with Puget Sound Keeper and Thorn Creek Alliance as well. So those are some of our program successes. Next slide, please. There are some problems and pitfalls involved in doing this. And, probably the first one is just finding a way to connect to the community. So you may have a great program, but how do you let people know about your program? Another problem or pitfall is organizational resources. As an all volunteer program, we don't have any dedicated staff who are working on this. So it's primarily volunteer efforts of a few individuals. So they only have X amount of resources to apply to the program. So that's a pitfall. Funding can be a pitfall, although really that hasn't been an issue for our program, fortunately. Another key thing that you have to overcome in developing a program like this is coming up with a good model of what is it that you're going to follow, what methodology you're going to teach. And then ultimately, probably the biggest problem and pitfall is that stormwater issues and development issues put a lot of pressure on watersheds and water quality, and that's a big problem to try to overcome. Next slide, please. So we've been fortunate and we've gotten support from a lot of different groups and individuals. So Global Water Watch is an organization that's headquartered out of Auburn University, and they've given us our training curriculum and training materials. Early on, we were funded by the Rose Foundation for Communities and the Environment, which has a Puget Sound grassroots grants program. And we also were funded by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife Aquatic Lands Enhancement Account. King County Council member Rod Dembowski has been very supportive. We've gotten some grants allocated from his office. Currently, we're receiving grant funding and program support primarily from King County Wastewater Treatment Division Waterworks Grant Program, and also from an organization called the Cascade Water Alliance. Next slide, please. So another question we were asked to answer is, how well are we known? In other words, does anybody know about what we're doing and support our work? And if so, why or why not? So I would suggest that we are known primarily just within the local community of people and nonprofits and surface water people, essentially people who are already kind of plugged into these type of water issues, which is great. The problem is that we end up sort of preaching to the choir. So how do you reach those new people? I kind of view us as being part of the we're a little patch on the quilt of people that are working on to improve the local environment, but we're always working on ways that we could have a wider impact. Next slide, please. All right, and that is the end of my presentation. So I will stick around and be ready to answer any questions at the end of our panel presentation. Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce Michelle and Rai next.
Hello, I'm Michelle. I'm a youth intern for the Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association.
And I'm Rai, and I've been a project manager for the last 8 months for DVSA. Next slide.
So the Duwamish Valley Sustainability Association, or the DVSA, is a community-based group. We want to empower the Duwamish Valley community by training youth, especially those from BIPOC families, in topics related to STEAM, so they can identify solutions for our community throughout projects aligned with environmental justice and sustainable development. The DVSA was started in 2017 by Edwin Hernandez and now have 3 programs called Juntos Podemos Cuidar Nuestro Río Duwamish, Juntos Podemos Cuidar Nuestra Tierra y Adolescentes Animados. Next.
Our Juntos Podemos Cuidar Nuestro Río or Duwamish program centers around stewarding the Duwamish River, which is Seattle's only river, and it flows through occupied Duwamish land. Prior to colonization, the river meandered through a diverse ecosystem of fertile floodplain forests, marshes. During industrialization, the river was channelized and armored to accommodate shipping and industry, resulting in the loss of 5 miles of river and 98% of the river's habitat. In 2001, after more than a century of heavy manufacturing and disposal across sewage, the EPA declared the Lower Duwamish Waterway a Superfund site. Next slide.
Today, the Duwamish Valley continues to be the site of 80% of Seattle's industrial activity, as you can see by the dirt parcels on the map and hundreds of storm drains that empty into the river, as shown by the red dots. The goal of our project is to address these environmental injustices by educating our community on these issues and championing their voices around pollution, source control, and cleanup of the Superfund site. Next.
So the project initially began in 2017 with the intention of working with youth to provide information on site to the community. Initially it entailed traditional engagement strategies, but evolved as youth expressed interest in learning new skills related to science, technology, and filmmaking. After learning about source control, the youth wanted to explore more about how stormwater can contaminate the river. I'll explain more about in the next slide, which led to our most recent water quality monitoring project. Next slide.
We focused on monitoring drainage points on the Duwamish River because more than 20,000 acres drain into it, and the biggest source of pollution on the river is stormwater runoff, which could contain oils from cars, fertilizers, and other debris. Next, we will show you this video, which will give a brief introduction to our project. Next.
Let me know if any issues with the sound.
I'm Gabe, and I'm part of Juntos Podemos Cuidar Nuestro Río Duwamish. The group first started in 2017, but I joined in 2019. I wasn't that old back then. Our purpose was to inform people about toxicity and the pollution in the river. And so we made videos, we posted it on Facebook, just let people know.
Did you know that the Lower Duwamish River is a Superfund site?
And then in 2021, we worked with Thrive, and we talked a lot about water quality.
I'm Michelle. I'm Fatima. So today we're just going around the river and taking water samples. We're taking samples from different pipes that are along the river. Some of them come from private companies, some of them come from the street. The reason we're taking water samples is to see how contaminated the water that goes into the river is.
Hi, I'm Diana. In this project, we learned how to use scientific instruments and chemical tests to measure water quality. After we collect our water, we measure alkalinity, dissolved oxygen, pH, turbidity, and other variables.
After we collect our samples, we go to the computer and put in our data from what we measured today.
Hi, my name is Carlos, and what I've learned from this program is how to make charts from Excel.
Since we're participating in all these different programs, we're kind of ahead, and we also learn more about where we live in our environment and what we can do to take care of it.
I've lived here all my life pretty much, and I've never been able to be in the water at all. And so maybe seeing that come through for some future children, future residents.
Yeah, we'd like to have a healthy river for not only us, but also the wildlife that lives in this water.
And this water isn't just here, it doesn't stay here, it goes to Puget Sound as well.
And it affects everyone.
We've been testing for the past 5 months, and you didn't see the progress we have made. I learned a lot from it, like all about how to make sure this is doing right. And I've been really happy to be in this group for all this time. I'm Gabe.
In the beginning of our project, Eric and Anna taught us to use instruments such as the handheld multimeter and chemical tests to measure different variables of water quality, such as temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, and conductivity.
Next, we identified 12 points on the waterway to monitor. Although we had a GIS map created by Puget Soundkeeper that remains within our project area, ran into a major access issue. As you can see on the map on the right, most of the shoreline is either zoned as private industry in pink or port facility in brown, meaning there's actually no public access. So luckily, Anna connected us with Amanda from Heron's Nest, who agreed to take us out by boat weekly, and that was vital to this project. Another challenge was that this is a tidally area, and we were restricted by student schedules, so we were often not able to go out during low tide when all of the pipes were exposed. So the map on the right shows the drains we did select for consistent monitoring for their elevation, accessibility, and flow. And the green dots indicate that we were able to access them by foot, and the blue dots mean that we had to go by boat. Next slide.
We would go 2 times collect samples. We would go by foot or by boat, however I mentioned earlier. And if we couldn't reach them by land, we would sometimes go by kayak to not disturb the sediment cap. When trying to reach a sample site, most of the days we would go, it would be very cold and sometimes it'd be rainy, but those are the days we would get more samples. After collecting all the samples, we would measure our variables using the handheld multimeter. Next.
We're a small grassroots organization operating on a small budget and just had 1 grant for this project. And it was our first time doing this kind of project. We had to approach it with a lot of creativity and also leverage our partnerships to address all the unforeseen challenges that we found. Our partnerships with the Duwamish River Community Coalition, Puget Soundkeeper Alliance, Snow King Watershed Council, the Heron's Nest, and the Public Library gave us vital expertise, as well as resources like a meeting space, instruments, and a boat. Furthermore, we took a DIY approach when possible, creating our own, creating this for a third of the cost than we would find it otherwise. Next slide.
When collecting and analyzing data, we first had to learn how to use Excel and make charts and tables. After doing so, we would transfer all of our data into a data sheet on Excel, because when we first are sampling, we would write it down on paper. Our goal with all the data we collected is to build a public accessible database. Next.
So as we are looking forward in this program, as Michelle mentioned, we want to build an accessible database to share long-term data. We also want to continue our water efforts and incorporate new cohorts and create kind of a peer facilitation and knowledge sharing program between our current cohort and new cohorts. Other program, we're currently creating animated videos and a 3D model to share information about the cleanup process with the community. And finally, we also want to move into a visioning phase where youth can remember as the space that supports and all forms of life. So that's the big picture of our project. Next slide.
A couple of things that led to our success was youth being able to learn new skills that they were interested in and that they could use in future careers. Youth were also given monetary compensation for all the work that they did. All this work also went back to community. Not only did it help the youth of the Duwamish Valley, but also what they learned also went back to their families. I know in my experience, I would go back and tell my parents of what I had learned that day, and my friends were more willing to learn and to change things. Next.
So yeah, that's our project, and it's been such an honor to present it here. And I just wanted to thank all of our partners and support. The project was funded the Rose Foundation, and I want to call out our fiscal sponsor, Sustainable Seattle, and just all of the other organizations that have offered so much support through this process. So thank you.
All right, I'd like to turn it over to Kirsten McDad for resources.
Hi, everyone. Adam, Michelle Rye, great programs. Really excited to learn about those. And yeah, my name is Kirsten McDade, and I am the Pollution Prevention Specialist at Resources. We are a nonprofit organization up in Bellingham, and we are also a Waterkeeper Alliance member, North Sound Baykeeper to be exact, and we're and restoring marine and nearshore habitats of North Puget Sound. Next slide, please. So our organization does a wide variety of work. We work with electrification, climate action plans, resiliency, aquatic reserves work, environmental justice, and we have a schools program. But tackling pollution is a high priority of ours. And we approach pollution prevention in a myriad of ways. And I'll be focusing on the education and outreach and holding polluters accountable sections of this work, those top two bubbles there. Because these ones are the bubbles of work that include community monitoring and stewardship opportunities. And in those two bubbles, I'll specifically talk about three separate campaigns that we're doing. Next slide, please. So the first campaign, Water Reporter campaign, we launched this in 2019. So it's relatively new, particularly considering COVID. And in the past, our organization has done a variety of stormwater education and outreach programs. And I was really looking at doing something a little different. And so I investigated this Water Reporter app campaign because it really combined stormwater education along with stormwater pollution reporting. It really geared allowed people to have tangible tools to actually take part in preventing stormwater pollution. And it's pretty much something anyone can get involved with. The initial funding for this project started with a public participation grant from the Department of Ecology, and it really just allowed us to get some materials together. We have this how to spot pollution and report pollution manual. We made stickers, we made videos, it paid for conference fees so we could present and table, and even tabling supplies. And that's really how we got word out initially for this program. We're at various conferences throughout Washington State, Western Washington State, but also through our other advocacy work that we do at Resources. Next slide, please. So the Water Reporter campaign basically encourages people to download the Water Reporter app. And you can do that through Google Play or the App Store. And it allows people to type in or report any type of pollution that they see on the landscape. And really any type. It doesn't even actually have to be pollution. It just has to look like pollution because really this is about getting the word out, creating people that are paying attention to their environment. So we encourage people to report foam, bacteria mats, sheens, of course, large amounts of garbage, even erosion and algal blooms, anything that doesn't look quite right on the landscape. And so the slide here shows what a pollution report looks like. You will just put a couple of comments in, like I see a sheen in Bellingham Bay, or there's a lot of foam gathering right here on Padden Creek. And then you take a picture and the app actually geolocates that. And you can do that on the fly right when you're in the field, or you can actually go back to your computer or your cell phone and find that exact spot later and geolocate it. And then you select the organization you're a part of. And in our case, it's the North Sound Baykeeper. And then you hit send. And everybody that is a part of this Water Porter campaign will get that post. So we're hoping to expand this program in other parts of the region. Already people in Birch Bay, the Birch Bay Watershed and Aquatic Resources is using it, the Lake Whatcom Watchers, and then Puget Sound Keepers and Deschutes Estuary Restoration Team are also considering using this Water Reporter app for pollution reports. Next slide, please. So this is what a post looks like on the Water Reporter app. This is one of actually the original posts we got, but I love it because it really just highlights how successful this type of reporting can be. So someone reported this kind of reddish dust down by the harbor, and I actually had no idea what it was. And so I had to ask around, and I found out that this was garnet abrasive that is used to sand the bottom of boats. And this can be pretty alarming because the bottom of boats usually have anti-fouling agents in them, like copper. And so having this dumped illegally kind of near the water was of a concern. So I called the Port of Bellingham, whose property it was on, and within 24, 48 hours, they cleaned it up. And then on the right side here, this dialog box is on the app. It's actually seen underneath that post. Is just a little back and forth between citizens and myself, explaining what I think the pollution is, why I think it's bad, and then what action was taken to clean it up, and then when it actually cleaned up. So you just have this kind of further dialogue that you would get in normal reporting. Next slide, please. So typically when someone reports pollution, the little person in the red, maybe you out there, might call your pollution hotline at your city or the Department of Ecology and say, hey, I noticed some pollution going on here. And that agency person may or may not get back to you and will hopefully do something to clean it up. But sometimes you really just don't know if it was pollution, what happened, you don't know the full story of it. Adding this app in there where you actually post it to this Water Reporter website, you then can have follow up on it and you can see other pollution reporting. So you basically just kind of get an idea of what other types of pollution are out there, what that pollution was, if it was pollution, if someone in the community can answer that. Sometimes we don't know what pollution is all the time. But anyway, just kind of encourages people to be more part of a pollution fighting community rather than just a single reporter. And I think in general, it just really increases the transparency and knowledge about local pollution. Next slide, please. So just a couple of the successes that we've seen. When you post a pollution report on the app, icons, picture icons, so you can kind of keep track of where the pollution reports are occurring, so you can see hot spots. And you can see in this case, it's really in the city limits are where, this is Bellingham right here in Bellingham Bay, that's where we're seeing most of the pollution is actually in the city. And the picture here is a woman named Barbara who called me, it was a little over a year ago, and said that her neighbor was pouring motor oil down the storm oil drain. So, of course, a very big concern. So I called City of Bellingham very quickly, and they went and sent a pump truck out and pumped it out. But they kept continuing to pour oil down. They pumped it out again. the city of Bellingham was supposed to send some education materials, and I'm not sure if they ever did, but Barbara and I decided to go out in her neighborhood and we just put these little placards on every single stormwater drain. Just basically saying, hey, stormwater, this, this goes directly to our public waterways. It's not a garbage can. And in the end, this wound up just being an educational solution, and the neighbors figured out that wasn't the appropriate thing to do with their used motor oil, and the dumping stopped. We also had kind of a similar situation in another neighborhood where neighbors were throwing hypodermic needles down a storm drain, and they were told by the city of Bellingham to do this. So there was some mixed messaging even within the stormwater department. So again, it was a matter of connecting the dots and saying, hey, we need to have the clear messages out there. We need to be telling everyone the same thing. Nothing but water goes down the storm drain. And that message was also delivered to those people in that neighborhood. They were trying to do the right thing, but it was not the right thing. I had a posting of an illegal ditch that was being dug in the county, and I was able to contact Fish and Wildlife and have them look into it, because it was a ditch going into a salmon bearing stream. I had a call about some degrading barrels that had PCBs in them when we were able to remove them to hazardous waste. So I feel like this reporting system basically gives me the tools, gives our community the tools to nudge agency folks to work a little faster, or even just focus in on some of the issues that they may not be seeing, because just more eyes on the landscape allows for more pollution to be reported. It helps to elevate our voices in our community, and it can draw awareness to certain issues within our community and help find solutions for those. Next slide, please. Some of the lessons learned is that not all people want to download an app and use it. And that was pretty frustrating at first when I had some resistance to that. I found, like, particularly the younger generation, they think it's a fun tool to use, but some people get frustrated with it and don't want to bother. And that's okay, because they can phone, they can email, and in general, I've noticed that reports have gone up threefold since the start of this program, but not necessarily all using the app. And so what I'll do is, if they phone me or text me or email me, I'll go to the site, I'll take a picture of the pollution, and then I'll post it on Water Reporter. So it gets on there one way or another. And sometimes I'm just that person, the go-between person. Another lesson learned is that having connections with the regulatory agency has been crucial to the success. So even when we started just developing this project, we met with the folks at the Port of Bellingham, City of Bellingham, Conservation District, and the Department of Ecology. So they understood what we were doing, and that we weren't trying to take their jobs away from them. We were just really trying to be partners. We're all trying to work to getting to cleaner water sooner, and that we're just one more tool in that solution. Next slide, please. Another kind of unintended benefit to this Water Reporter app is that because everything is mapped out and geolocated, we are able to basically take that information and make a trash hotspot map. We have a lot of folks in the community, including our organization, that does trash cleanups, and now we just kind of document where trash normally collects or tends to collect on the landscape, and people can use this map then to guide on where to do cleanups. Next slide, please. So I just want to touch briefly on two other kind of programs we are working on that address kind of community monitoring aspects. So last year, our Sustainable Schools program began offering 6-hour STEM clock hour professional development workshops. And I mention this because the workshop's really based on action and finding solutions. And so this workshop's a combination of hands-on activities mixed with the reality of the situation. Stormwater is the single largest source of contamination to the Salish Sea, and it has acute and obvious impacts like the coho pre-spawn mortality syndrome. Salmon are dying on their way back to their spawning grounds in urban creeks. And it has more subtle effects like PCBs and other toxics accumulating in Chinook, orca whales, and humans. So we present the latest research on coho pre-spawn mortality syndrome, but also provide teachers with a large list of actions that their students can be involved with. Next slide, please. So as a part of the curriculum, we show teachers how to map their stormwater flow on their campus. And in doing so, they can figure out where improvements can be made. Are there areas of bare ground or grass where shrubs and trees can be planted? Are there areas where concrete can be removed? Are there places that they could put these rain gardens in the box? And we're actually offering workshops now on how to build these rain barrels on the box using used materials. Resources also is the home to Restore, which is a place where used building materials are bought and sold. So they can use materials and reuse them to build something that could filter stormwater. We also encourage teachers to bring their students to stewardship programs, beach cleanups, maybe even adopting or creating dog waste stations. We have students think about source control and, of course, encourage them to use the Water Reporter program and app. We also mention cross-curriculum activities like writing letter for change, maybe writing letters to tire companies to think about finding alternatives to that 6 ppdq that's toxic to coho salmon and other salmon, or do stormwater drain art. And then we also have a green team network that helps teachers and students actually implement some of these projects on the ground. And then lastly, similar to the Duwamish folks, we actually have a stormwater monitoring program. We only go out once a month. And we have some of the similar constraints. So we can only visit a lot of our outfalls at low tide, and some of them are only available or accessible by boat because of private property concerns. But we basically monitor 6 outfalls and 2 creeks, and again, once per month, basically trying to find and fix illicit discharges and also identify polluted stormwater. So where can we focus best management practices? Where does the city need to add more rain gardens and more filtration? At this point, we only invite a couple community members at a time with us because, again, we're sampling by boat, by canoe or kayak, and we don't have a lot of resources to bring more than 1 or 2 people at a time, but we try to engage the community as best we can. We're in the process of enlarging this program to add more land-based stations so that we can have more of a community effort in this. Next slide, please. So this monitoring program is also showcased on the Water Reporter app, and you can see all the stations there and check up on their water quality from time to time. It's a live map, so you can look at it anytime, and it's updated every time I add the data points. Next slide, please. And this has been one of our works in progress. C Street Outfall has this white microbial mass that we've noted, and we've been continually engaging the city and the Department of Ecology to help us understand why this is growing at the bottom of this outfall. And they finally did a DNA sequencing and identified it as 5 bacteria species that use hydrogen sulfide as an energy source. And this can be, this hydrogen sulfide can occur naturally, but it's usually an indicator of raw sewage. And so now the city is currently investigating conducting up pipe investigations to find out if they can find this source of sewage. Next slide, please. Bennett Outfall, we've also, it's problematic. All these red dots show where the E. coli bacteria is not meeting standards. So more often than not, we have high bacteria counts coming out of this Bennett outfall. And then lastly, just after a year of doing this monitoring work, we were able to give a rating to each one of our monitoring sites. And in a nutshell, we are finding that the stormwater that is entering Bellingham Bay does not meet water quality standards on a regular basis. So we definitely have a lot of work to do to be able to improve the water quality that's being dumped into Bellingham Bay. And we feel that having this data is brought us a seat at the table to be able to talk to City of Bellingham, Port of Bellingham Department of Ecology, to be able to find solutions to these pollution problems. And again, I've only been working at Resources for 3 years, a little over 3 years. And so all 3 of these projects are, in a sense, in their infancy, and I'm just really hoping to expand them and get more community members involved. Thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Kirsten. And next, we're going to listen to a very short presentation by Hannah and Charlene that was filmed earlier.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Charlene, and this is Springbrook Creek. It is a waterway that flows through South King County in the towns of Kent and Renton. It flows into what remains of the Black River. The Black River was once the outlet of Lake Washington until the ship canal was opened through Lake Union over 100 years ago. This remnant river then joins with the Green River in Tukwila at a point where the Green changes its name to the Duwamish River. This map shows you the entire Green River watershed, and this red circle shows the lower Green River sub-watershed where Springbrook Creek is located. Historically, Springbrook Creek was heavily forested and supported healthy runs of Chinook salmon. Its headwaters are still so pure that the city of Renton uses it for drinking water. Now, this is a map from 2001, but it still shows pretty clearly what this landscape looks like in this part of the watershed today. Most of the orange color you see in the map indicates that the area is covered by high urban density. In this area, which includes the towns of Tukwila, Renton, Kent, and Auburn, you'll find large corporations like Boeing and Amazon, which have enormous sprawling complexes and acres of roads and parking lots. Springbrook Creek was forced into straight ditches and culverts, first as the area's forests were cut and it was converted into farmland, and later as it was developed into residential, commercial, and industrial areas. Its lower stretches are now overrun by invasive species and polluted by stormwater runoff. No salmon have been seen in the creek for decades. A pumping station sits across the mouth of the creek, and it must literally be pumped out to allow its waters to join to the Green River downstream.
Thank you, Charlene. And hello, everyone. My name is Hannah. And so South King County, where Springbrook Creek is located, is also one of the most ethnically, racially, and economically diverse areas of the county. This map shows that communities in the south part of King County also suffer from higher health risks that are linked to pollution in our air, lands, and waters. So enter our project, which is called the Lost Urban Creeks Project. In 2017, Puget Soundkeeper Alliance, which works to protect clean water in Puget Sound, started working with Unleash the Brilliance, a youth mentoring program. The Land Conservancy Organization Forterra and the Snow King Watershed Council, which trains water quality community monitors, also joined in on the project. Support for the project has come from King County and from other public and private funders. Our goal is to raise the profile of Springbrook Creek so that it is no longer a creek that is lost among the parking lots and warehouses of Kent and Renton. It is a creek that deserves our attention and protection because if it is polluted, it is contributing to pollution on the larger watershed and to the larger community. This is not a creek or a community that we can just sacrifice and write off. While we work for the restoration of the creek, the Lost Urban Creeks Project is also focused on youth development. Unleash the Brilliance, which serves youth in South King County, where Springbrook Creek is located, started by working with youth out of truancy courts, trying to re-engage them with their own education. The Lost Urban Creeks Project offers youth an opportunity to learn new skills and gain knowledge in urban stream restoration and renewal. We learn about how these urban waterways reflect the health of our own communities, and we understand that the role that we play in the protection of both. So there are 5 areas to our project. Number 1 is organizing educational programs and developing youth skills. Number 2 is monitoring water quality and getting out into the field to conduct investigations. Number 3 is representing and presenting the project to the community and to local decision makers. Number 4 is conducting restoration and stewardship activities. And number 5 is promoting equity, social, and environmental justice.
Now, here's what we accomplished. Local, municipal, and county staff have received our water quality data reports, and these are being used to inform and building pressure for more restoration efforts in the watershed. We created and shared a video of our water quality results
during the pandemic for local city and county staff as well. And after COVID struck, we had to move our outreach online. As there is a nice trail along part of the creek, in partnership with the company Geocaching, we developed an adventure lab, which is a phone app hide-and-seek tour of the creek. This allows us to share information on Springbrook Creek's history and situation with the public. We've also removed over 2,200 pounds of garbage in Springbrook Creek, and through beach cleanups and kayak patrols, we removed debris along other shorelines and waterways in King County as well. Our work is also attracting others to look at Springbrook Creek and work to improve the water quality in the watershed. What's unique about our project is that the work that youth are doing in the project is valued, and the project organizers want the youth to know that there is value in this work. So all the youth in the project are paid interns, earning $15 an hour for the time that they contributed. Transportation and food support is also provided to try and eliminate any barriers to participation. Youth are primarily middle and high school students, but there is no time limit on their participation, and we've had a few college students in the project as well. Our project tries to identify and bring environmental professionals of color who can act as role models and mentors by acting as speakers, leading workshops, tours, and listening sessions. The project has a power and resource sharing commitment. It is governed and informed by a Youth Advisory Council that meets regularly to help guide and provide feedback on the program. We have a vision that every urban waterway has its own community advocates that speak for their restoration and protection. To support that, a story map was created about lost urban creeks that is on Puget Soundkeeper's website. This will grow with time to showcase the efforts of different groups working to protect their local waterways, particularly in urban areas. We are now in our 6th year of the project, which is constantly growing and changing, but we hope it can serve as a model for what can be done in other watersheds.
For more information, you can visit the links on the screen or email luc@pugetsoundkeeper.org, or even follow us on Instagram. Feel free to contact us, and we hope that you will check out our project and our story map about lost urban creeks.
Excellent. So now we're going to turn to our last presenter, Gary Olson from Thornton Creek Alliance. Have we lost Gary?
Here we.
There we.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. We don't see you though.
No, let's see if I can start my camera again. There we go. Okay, sorry. Great. Coming last is, Anna said last but not least, but I hope everybody's been very impressed by everything that's gone before me. It's been quite informative and certainly impressive. So thank you all to the participants in this panel. So my name is Gary Olson. I am he or him, and I am with Thornton Creek Alliance, which is a grassroots non-for-profit organization. We were founded back in '94, so we've only almost been around for 27, 28 years now. And our goals are really to protect and improve the creek and the watershed in the Thornton Creek area. Thornton Creek is located in the northeastern part of Seattle and extends up into Shoreline. It's the largest watershed in the Seattle area. Part of our program in the organization is to bring in speakers to talk about the watershed issues, etc. And probably about 6 years ago, we had Seattle Public Utilities stormwater manager come to our meeting and talk about the pollution issues in Thornton Creek. And again, Thornton Creek is an urban creek, so we know that it has a number of concerns. Based on that presentation and hearing about some of the issues on the creek, and also realizing that Seattle Public Utilities really only had one major scientist and part of a technical staff to work on all the watershed issues in Seattle, we felt that it might be an area that we would explore to see if we could be helpful in that arena. So let's put up the next slide, please. So in order to get going on this, we needed to determine a problem that would be something that the community would be interested in and benefit from. So what we did is we brought together a number of experts that had been working on the problems in Thornton Creek over the years. It's a fairly large group. And when we did that, we said, tell us a little bit about your work that you've been doing, and also describe the problems. And as we did that, we developed a list of the problems that people have been working on in the creek. And then we said, okay, let's try to prioritize those and see if we can make a match for a reasonable community effort to work on these particular issues. So we did that. We made decisions based on a couple of things. One is the importance of the problem to the creek, but also the practicality of being able to gain useful information from a community-based program. Next slide, please. So hopefully you can see this, but this is just a little diagram that shows kind of the various areas and agencies that we partnered with over this process. At the top, you kind of see some of the areas like NOAA and Department of Ecology, et cetera, where they participated in our initial meeting to help us determine what would be an effective areas of problem that we might be able to work on. And then at the bottom of this diagram, these are more ongoing relationships that we have with individual organizations, agencies, as this program has progressed. So we have kind of a back and forth going on in that arena. Next slide. Okay, so what do we need in order to have a successful community-based type program? And you kind of heard from others, what's involved. One of the things about community-based programs, many of them are sponsored by agencies reaching out to the community. Ours, again, is a grassroots effort. So one of the things that we knew that was important was if people are going to go out and spend effort and time trying to get information about a problem, that we needed to make sure that that information was getting put in the right hands of those that can actually do something about it. And in some cases, we have some minor effect, but it's really the agency that's going to have the major effect. In our case, it's Seattle Public Utilities that manages the creeks and waterways in the Seattle area. So based on that, we made a partnership with them, and they agreed, and again, I'll talk about some other things later, but they agreed that they would use our data. And what we had decided on from our decision tree in the previous slide was that initially we would go after E. coli monitoring, which was a significant issue in Thornton Creek, and Thornton Creek does run out into Lake Washington at Matthews Beach, so that is, again, another significant public issue. The other thing we needed was a monitoring method that community-based group could do. We wanted to make sure that we were, not only going to be sampling the creek systems, but also performing the analysis to the whole package. So people kind of felt that they were really involved in the whole system and had ownership of that. So we found some techniques through the Water Watch group that uses gels, etc. And Eric's familiar with that. that allows us to get fairly good results, good enough that it's acceptable to Seattle Public Utilities. And that's what we went with on our system. We modified it to make it safer for our community to work, but that's basically the process that we're using, Easy Gel process. And the third thing we needed was funding. And so we did get funding through King County wastewater grant funds, and that's kind of sustained us over the years. Again, it's really only for supplies. Everything else is volunteer. So all the money is really going into this whole monitoring program. Next slide, please. So again, in order to run a successful community-based program, you have to have community members, somebody that can actually go out and do the work here. So once we had this project, we needed to make sure that people understood why it was important. And so we had to sell it, so to speak, through the community in several different ways. But first of all was through our membership. So we contacted either our members or other community folks that we knew were interested in the creek and talked to them about our monitoring program. We also have several local summer neighborhood fairs and social events that go on in our community. And so we established a table, canopy, presentation, information, etc. on our monitoring program, as well as the other things that the organization does. And we go out to 7 or 8 non-COVID time period events. Hopefully that'll come back, but we did that in the first 3 years or so. And we got people that volunteered through that to be involved in our program. We also have engaged with schools in the area. 4 schools have been involved in our program, where the kids go out and do the monitoring. We go into the schools 3 or 4 times a year and talk to them about it. We supply them with all the materials that they need, and their information goes right into the same database as all of ours. And these are 4th and 5th graders that can do this. And it's very exciting to see what they've done and some of the additional environmental aspects that have come out of these programs in the schools. We present at public meetings, talk about what data we're getting, and we get interest through that and also through our website and social media. Next slide. So how do we sustain this effort? So as I mentioned, it's been going on now for about 5 years officially. The way we've been working it is we establish teams that kind of cover specific areas along the creek. One of the things we really wanted to do was, because the county only does 1 test per month at the mouth of Thornton Creek that's going out into, say, Matthews Beach, unless there's some exceptional thing going on. And the city does sporadic testing along the creek. We really wanted to do many, many sites so that if we saw high results, we might be able to track them down. Again, this is an older part of Seattle. There was a concern about sewer lines and breakage, etc. like that. So we wanted to be able to pinpoint whether we had a point source for the E. coli or a non-point source. So basically we established teams in the neighborhoods where the tributaries where the creek was flowing. We selected team leaders for each team that had enough passion to want to be involved in the scheduling and making sure that materials were available and the incubators, etc. for the team was at hand. And then we also realized that this was a great social opportunity for people within a neighborhood to really get together to understand what was going on with the creek, and also, you know, be neighbors around a very important issue to all of them. So that was another big part of this. And finally, here we encourage ideas and inputs. So through this system, we're not stagnant. One of the things that we try to do is keep ourselves up to date, keep improving our process, the things that we think are important as a group, and we try to work on that. Next slide. So One of the things in terms of sustaining is obviously continuing to grow our recruits. People do drop out of the system, so we are always looking for new people to come in, and so we've been fairly successful in kind of having a reasonably low turnover, but a turnover that can be filled with others. We eliminate anything that's unnecessary so that we've got, you know, as streamlined a process as we can. If it's not of value, if a site is not giving us any additional information, we'll eliminate that. We'll look for new opportunities, things to do, and I'll mention something about that in a minute. We have input and output systems. Again, data handling has been mentioned before. That's very important for people to be able to get their data easily into a system and then be able to look at those kinds of results and see what they're getting. And again, I'm going to show you a map that we generate the week after we've done our monitoring that shows what's happened throughout the watershed. We do have regular group meetings on a quarterly basis where we invite all of our monitoring folks in to talk about what's happening, what the results are. We do comparisons with this year, previous years, quarter to quarter, so we can understand what's kind of going on, look for patterns, etc. And then giving recognition, appreciation, and support. Again, during COVID, it's hard, but when we don't have COVID, when we have these meetings, we actually bring in food, so people kind of have a little bit of social and culinary opportunity during those events. Next slide. So just to wrap up a little bit here, just to show you kind of how our data is shared with folks. This represents a map that we send out after we've done monitoring the following week. You can see all those red dots. Those are 37 sites that we have sampled. All of those sites over the years. We now have focused more on about 20 sites that we're doing either weekly or bi-weekly in the watershed. And again, on this next, I'm going to show on this, there's some arrow points. So Thornton Creek has two main forks that then flow into one. The one fork is, I don't think you can see this, but the one fork is off on the left side coming from the Northgate area and flows to Meadowbrook Pond Park where those two arrows are. And that's the South Fork, and the North Fork is up further north, and that green area is like Jackson Park Golf Course. It flows around that and then meets up again with the South Fork at the confluence at Meadowbrook, and then that single floor that with the tributaries runs out into Matthews Beach. So I've highlighted kind of three locations here, the two that come into Meadowbrook and the one that flows out. And then we'll look at the next slide just to give you an idea of some of the data that we've been getting. So from 2017 through 2021, again, this is just one way we look at the data. We look at it in lots of different ways, but just to give you an idea. So the blue represents the North Fork, the red represents the South Fork coming into Meadowbrook, and the green is at Matthews Beach going out into Lake Washington. This is the average of a full year of data collected. So we can kind of look at patterns on that. It's kind of interesting. One pattern is that blue went up from the North Fork over 4 years, peaked last year, and then came down a bit more into what may be more traditional. We have some ideas about that, what's going on there. I'm not going to get into it right now. The South Fork has been fairly consistent, but again, one thing I'll point out is that green line that runs across, that's the below that level, which is 100 colony forming units per 100 mils for E. coli. Below that level is safe for human contact. Above that, it's unsafe depending on your sensitivity. And when you get up to 600, it's unsafe for everybody. So you can see that we do really have a significant E. coli problem in the Thornton Creek watershed. Anyway, that's quick. But I'm going to stop there because we probably want to have some questions. So again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Gary. And I'm going to stop sharing my slideshow so I can join you on the main stage. We were all worried that we were going to not use up our allotted time. We've used up quite a bit of it. We only have about 15 minutes left. And I want to propose there is a forum for live Q&A that people can use. And I see, unfortunately, let's see, make that bigger. I'll just go down these. How large is the geographic area where you are using the Water Reporter app? I guess this is to Kirsten. How many different agencies are responsible for following up when pollution sources are identified?
Yeah, so our region is basically Whatcom County and Skagit County, and we actually overlap Skagit County with Puget Sound Keepers too, so that's kind of shared territory. But that's where we're really promoting the use of the app. And then that's where it gets tricky, like depending on where the pollution is found, will depend who's responsible for cleaning it up. So within the boundaries of Bellingham, that's a no-brainer. That's City of Bellingham. But then as soon as you cross that border, it becomes out in the county. And I've just found with experience, they're not quite as responsive as Bellingham. And probably because most of the pollution actually does occur in urban areas. But that's kind of one of the reasons that I really like using this app is I can then problem solve really who to call to address that pollution source. Now we also have the Washington State Department of Ecology's ERTS system, the Emergency Response Tracking System. And so if there's any type of egregious type of pollution, like a large oil sheen or some kind of other just pollutant that seems very dangerous or dramatic, reporting it to them right away, they are then the system that will get in touch with everybody that needs to know about it, whether it's a salmon issue or an urban water quality issue, stormwater or whatnot.
Cool. We also have a question from Rebecca Brown regarding QAPs, or it was quality approval project plans. These are the plans that govern data collection for state-funded projects, and she's asking if these community science programs have developed a QAP or something similar to guide the data collection work. And is this a process so that the data can be used in statewide databases? I'll speak for the Lost Urban Creeks project, and yes, we do have a QAP that governs our work, but I think that I should kick that over to also Eric and to Gary at least. Do you have such a document that governs your data collection?
Eric, you want to go?
Sure. So I'll speak with regard to ours. So the partner organization that we're working under and using their protocols called Global Water Watch has a quality assurance project plan that defines the training techniques and the methodology that the volunteers are going to use. So we're operating under their own QAP, but I think at some point, I think it would be beneficial to develop our own, but we are operating under a plan, but it's not our own unique one. It's our kind of parent organization plan.
Right. And for us, we have our QAP, but it isn't, an officially recognized QAP. It doesn't necessarily have to be in terms of how our data is being used, but we do have that. We did develop that. It's not part of the grant requirement that we have either. So, but it's important to have good procedures. And as I say, because Seattle Public Utilities is looking and using our data, they're very familiar with what our process is for how we're sampling, etc.
Okay. The next question comes from Megan. Where does the data go once it is collected? Are you partnering with other organizations that work in the cleanup? Is it available to the public so people can track their local water quality in streams? I'd like to give Rye and Michelle a chance to answer this question first, because I know they were grappling with that issue?
Yeah, thank you. I think we are the ones that are still trying to figure that out. We created kind of we put all of our data in Excel on like a Google, and then the next step of analyzing it and figuring out how to share that is kind of something we're still working on. And so, yeah, we're currently creating like a 3D model, and we're thinking we could link that's hopefully link our data with that. But that's definitely something we're still working on figuring out. And thank you to Simone for offering support for that. And I think we'll probably be reaching out to these on support on that.
I also know that Kirsten showed Water Reporter, which allows the public to look at her data. Soundkeeper is also adopting Water Reporter to show our data collection on Springbrook Creek under the Lost Urban Creeks project. Gary and Eric, do you want to say how your data is made available to the public?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about it. Again, this is, again, E. coli data that we're generating. So this is kind of a health issue. So this is where it gets a little tricky for us, that we're not going out beyond, telling people that they, at a particular day or time that it's safe to go into the creek. And in fact, we certainly encourage people not to do that. But we share our data, as I mentioned, with Seattle Public Utilities. I have shared our data with other organizations that have been interested in taking a look at what we're getting, et cetera. But we do not generally share it with the public, on a website or something like that at this point. May change in the future, but right now that's not the case.
So our data, when it's collected, is uploaded to a database, a Global Water Watch database, which is accessible via our website. So you do have to drill down a little bit, because you'd have to, first of all, find our website, then you'd have to find our program, and then you'd have to look at our data within the program and then know what you're looking at. So I think we do collect the data and it is publicly viewable, but I think we could do a better job of promoting it and getting it out there. And so there's a couple of initiatives I've been wanting to work on, and we've actually been dabbling a little bit with Water Reporter with Anna, and I think I'd like to actually probably follow up with Kirsten to find out how we could use that as another way to better get our data out there.
Eric, another question came in for you as to that you have wrapped up your water monitoring classes for the spring. When is your next series of classes going to be offered?
We sort of do those on a demand basis or seasonally. I think this year we're going to do another series in the summertime, and typically we've done like a spring and a fall, and I think we'll do a summer. We have some partner organizations that usually ask for some training in the summertime, but we can open those classes up for anyone who wants to participate in those. And some of the training is really best done in the summer. Like, for instance, looking for the benthic macroinvertebrates is best done like in kind of the late summertime frame to find the most. So I haven't posted on our website yet, but I think we will have a series coming up this summer as well.
Okay. And Gary, we have a question from a researcher who's done work on sanitary services provided to the homeless population. She'd heard you speak before and was curious if you had, the question is, I was curious if you had considered calling for sanitary services for our unhoused neighbors.
Yeah, yes, we do. Yeah, for folks that aren't aware, so I think everybody's probably aware. Encampments in Seattle are, fairly significant, and natural areas are potentially a good area where people will go, parks, etc. And that's where some of our creeks are located. And we did, a few years ago, after I think our program was 1.5 or 2 years old, noticed basically off of one of our natural areas, high E. coli coming where we, again, the nice thing about doing many sites is you can see on one side of the area, the value was low. On the other side of the area, the value was high. When we sample basically, within 10 or 15 minutes of one another. And so we could track, the impact of the encampment. So we have been making a case with the city that especially during the pandemic, when removal of encampments is something that they did not want to do, obviously for a number of reasons, that they supply, sanitary, situations for the folks so that, waste does not get into the creek. And in some cases that's been successful, in other cases it is not. And more recently, we had a major encampment in the North Creek, and we went up there and sampled. It was an area that we hadn't been sampling for a while because there wasn't data that was being useful, but we decided because of the encampment we would do that. And sure enough, we got high results when we sampled down below. The city came through and removed that encampment a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, major removal. And we went back after that, sampled, and it was fine. It's back down to what we considered to be normal. So, again, it's encampments and homeless is such a major issue in the area, but in terms of environmental impact, that's what we try to stress. Is if people are going to be living in the natural areas, that we provide facilities to take care of things that are going to impact the creek.
Great. We had a question, and we only have a couple minutes left. And I'm sorry we're not going to get to every question, but we did have a question about the gap between water quality monitoring on discharges to storm drains versus monitoring on discharges to streams. If anybody had any comments, I know that, Kirsten is monitoring storm drains, and so is Rye and Michelle. I don't know if anybody has any opinion. In my case, Lost Urban Creeks project with Unleash the Brilliance, we're monitoring a stream. Any thoughts on the difference, the gap between these two?
I can say something. Yeah, and it's really the main reason we started doing this stormwater monitoring project, because our two urban creeks, Whatcom and Swalacom, are very well researched. There's quite a bit of data that's available on those, and they have some continuous monitoring. But our storm drains, for the most part, are not being monitored at all. And the 6 outfalls that we're studying on a regular basis have huge footprints. They're drawing from very large percentages of the city. And so it's been really enlightening to get that information, because it's just not required in the stormwater permits. They're not required to monitor that on any regular basis. So it's very underreported. And so having that data has been really interesting. And just to reiterate, it's bringing us to the table. We have information that we can now have discussions with the City of Bellingham and Department of Ecology, because there are huge data gaps in that.
Okay. And in the last minute or so, Rye and Michelle, do you want to say anything about your stormwater work and what you've been finding from it?
Michelle, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, sure. What we've noticed is, since the Duwamish River itself is all very contaminated, specifically the area we were looking at, since it's a super fun site, and then seeing the storm drains, the water that we collect from that, it's kind of similar in some aspects, and some aspects are a little bit more different. In some, it would depend on the drain we were sampling, but in some drains we would see much more contamination, and the coloring of the water itself would also be very different. It'd be more yellow than the water of the Duwamish River itself. So depending on like the drain that we were sampling would be different from the river itself.
Oh, excellent. I want to just, with the last seconds we have before I'm cut off completely, I just want to thank all of our presenters for taking the time out to prepare a presentation on this really interesting subject. I'm sure you'll be able to get more information on all the presenters here and the groups that we mentioned and the activities that we mentioned. So thank you, everyone. And we hope to see you in the rest of the conference sessions.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so